I'm ready
Sure.
to go with you, Tim.
We're rolling. If you just say your name and spell it for me.
Okay, it's David L. Arnold, David Arnold,
What's your title, Dave?
Assistant Professor of Geography.
Good. Thank you. Okay.
First year here?
Yeah, I arrived here last June.
Okay. First of all, let's talk about the Storm Chasers. Why did you develop a Storm Chase team here at Ball State?
Well, there's probably three reasons for it. One of them is the ability of the university to provide some community service. Unfortunately, Delaware County lies on the fringe of radars from Indianapolis and in the North Webster Weather Service office. The radars has a tough time seeing the lower part of the storm, so we need a lot more visual identification out there. So we're trying to provide some community service by getting our storm chase teams out there, getting the information real time, radioing it directly to the Emergency Operations Center, the EMA office here in Delaware County, and to the National Weather Service. The secondary reason is for education. A lot of the students spend numerous hours in the classroom, and I like to get them out to see what this theoretical stuff they've been working on looks like in the real world. And the third is that it's just kind of fun to enjoy Mother Nature.
Excuse me just a second. I'm a little less step. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now, what was the initial reaction from the student body?
We had a lot of people very interested. I held 4 2-hour training sessions, actually twice, once this past fall, once this past spring. I think we probably had 60 students, participate in some fashion, a lot of enthusiasm. We have done a couple of chases now locally. Not a lot has happened, but it turns out that we've probably had consistently about 15 or so students that participate. So a lot of enthusiasm at first, and then the reality sometimes of getting up at 1 or 2 in the morning to chase is maybe not so appealing. So,
Well, give me an example of one of your chases that happened mid-morning. I mean, how do you know when they come over?
well, we usually know a couple of days in advance that the conditions are going to be right for the development of severe thunderstorms. And so we start preparing up to 1 to 2 days in advance. Closer and closer we get to the actual event, the better handle we have on when it will occur. And a lot of times we'll know 3 to 4 hours ahead of time that it absolutely will start at a certain time in a certain location so that we can get our forces together and get to where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. What were the kids? What were the kids like the first time they were in the van going out for a storm?
Well, I think they're excited, anxious. Some of them have seen severe storms, some of them haven't. I know that this past chase, although we saw one severe thunderstorm simply because the winds gusted to 60 miles per hour, a lot of them were very excited about the fact they were close to lightning. And they saw a lot of vivid lightning, and I think a lot of them sort of became addicted at that point. And I think these are the students that I'm going to see chase after chase after chase.
What was it like the first time you were involved in a storm chase?
Well, the first time I ever chased a storm, I guess, I was living in Reno, Nevada, back in the early 1980s. And I noticed that further to the east, 20, 30, 40 miles, there was always a lot of thunderstorms. And I just got curious. I wanted to see what it'd like to be underneath them. So I got my car and drove out there. And I sort of got addicted to it then. I enjoyed the lightning, and every time there was a storm anywhere within the region, I'd drive out and try to find it. And then as I moved further east, I went to IU. I did my PhD at IU. So gave me the opportunity to chase in the Midwest in the late 80s and early 90s, and the storms are a lot better there than they are in Nevada, so it's just grown from that point on.
Talk about the storms here in Indiana. How did they compare to, say, Florida or in Oklahoma, Nebraska?
Well, the storms in the Midwest can produce tornadoes just as strong as classic Tornado Alley. In fact, a lot of people don't realize, but northern Indiana, north central Indiana is a real hot spot for very strong and violent tornadoes, and it rivals the frequency of those features out in Tornado Alley. The difference is that a lot of times in the Midwest, the environment is more humid. There's a lot more rain with the storms. It tends to obscure the cloud structures that you use to identify the location where the tornado would likely form, or in case the tornado forms, it may be difficult to see because of the poor contrast, and maybe the tornado is rain-wrapped. Out in the Great Plains, the frequency of storms that are heavy precipitation are much less, so they're easier to observe in the Great Plains. The Great Plains storms, by and large, tend to be stronger in terms of producing very large hail, really strong winds, maybe 100, 120, 140 miles an hour. But when it comes to tornadoes, Indiana and Oklahoma are very comparable.
Now, when you talk about tornadoes, we've had a bunch of popular movies out recently: Twister,
Right.
Day of the Tornado, Return of the Tornado, Son of the Tornado, and you always featuring these storm chasers out there.
Right.
Did that get a lot? Did a lot of kids involved in the storm chaser group here see that and kind of like bring that with
Sure.
them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it did a great job of promoting the excitement of storms. I thought it was very unrealistic in the way it characterized storm chase activities, but I think it did a lot to promote severe storms, so to speak. The problem is with a movie like Twister, it's very romantic, it's very exciting, it's nonstop action. Storm chasing is not like that. A lot of storm chasing is hurrying up and doing nothing. And sometimes we can drive for 12 or 14 hours and just see absolutely nothing. And that can happen 3, 4, 5 times in a row, and then finally you see something good. So it's not quite as glamorous as it looks in the movie Twister. So of course some of those students lose interest over a period of time. But we do hold on to a core really dedicated, addicted storm chasers. And I'd say we'll probably have between 15 and 20 of those here at Ball State from now on.
When you say good storm, what's a good storm?
A good storm is one that is spectacular in some fashion. For me, it doesn't have to produce a tornado to be spectacular, just a lot of really great cloud-to-ground lightning, or maybe the storm structure during the day when you can actually see the clouds. To me, that's really quite exciting. To see large hail, large wind gusts, those types of things. I never go into it with the idea that if I don't see a tornado, then it's been a bust or that it's been a disappointment. I go into it with the idea, gee, I hope I see a nice storm, and most of the time I do. So I'm never really disappointed.
What do you hope the kids will get out of being a storm chaser in college?
Oh, a lot of things. I think this idea of community service, I think, is something that will stay with them forever. I think a lot of them would tend to volunteer for other community service aspects in their lives. Giving to the community, I think, is important. But they also have a great appreciation for the forces of nature and natural disasters. Most people who've never lived through a natural disaster have no appreciation for the scale, the emotional turmoil, the financial difficulty. And these kids are learning what that's like firsthand. I think those are lessons that you probably couldn't learn anywhere else unless you happen to be unlucky enough to be in an earthquake or a hurricane or something like that.
We've seen in Indiana, as you know, a lot of horrible tornadoes. I believe it was the early 70s where they just ripped across the state.
1974, yeah.
74. It was just the anniversary of that not too long ago.
Right.
What are the chances of another day of the tornado occurring in the state or in the Midwest?
Well, the chances are just as good as they've always been, and I would guess you'd probably see an event like that once every 30 to 40 years where you'd have that number of tornadoes. People think about 1974 as the big tornado day in Indiana, but in 1990, June 2nd of 1990, we had reports of between 60 and 80 tornadoes. And it may not have been 60 or 80 tornadoes, but that's a large number of reports. And so that was only, 15 years or so after this 1974 thing. So I would say every 30 to 40 years we would see a tremendous outbreak, and maybe every 15 to 20 years we would see a pretty significant outbreak. But we don't need a large outbreak, a large number of tornadoes to have one very violent and tremendously damaging tornado.
And describe to me that sort of tornado.
Well, the fortunate thing about that type of tornado is that it's slow to develop and it's long-lived, and we know it's there, and we have a lot of warning with it. Actually, some of the more dangerous tornadoes are the smaller ones that develop quickly. They're on the fringe of the radar. We can't see them. We don't get the warning out in time. Those are the more dangerous ones. But the large ones, those that produce the F5 damage, those reach speeds of between 260 to 300 miles per hour, perhaps, and it can destroy a concrete steel reinforced building if it hits it just right, but it will usually level any residence that it encounters.
And how wide would one be?
Oh, they range in width. You really can't make a correlation between strength and width, but in general, most of the big F5s are probably 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile in diameter in terms of the actual vortex, and then the damage pattern that produced would be up to a mile to even 1.5 miles wide.
Have you ever seen one?
I've never seen an F5 tornado. I've seen tornadoes of F3 that would have done F3 damage had they have been in a populated area. They were out in open country. So I've seen some pretty strong tornadoes.
Why haven't we seen too many F5s?
They're just very rare. The atmospheric conditions just have to kind of fall into place. Everything has to be perfect for that to happen, and it just doesn't occur very often.
What's give me a couple of anecdotes about storm chasing. What's some of the sillier or dumber or scarier things that happen to you?
Well, maybe the scariest thing that happened to me, and I've got this on video, is that we were chasing a storm northwest Oklahoma City. And I go out every spring for 3 weeks with the students and take them out there too, as well as here in Indiana. We were under an overpass waiting a mesocyclone. It's a storm structure that produces a tornado to move from the southwest to the northeast, a couple of miles in front of us. And we were sitting there waiting for the storm, and some hail came out ahead of the mesocyclone and got thrown head-on into us as we were under the overpass. And even though we were protected by the overpass, we still lost our windows. So that was kind of exciting and a big surprise because we didn't expect that to happen.
What's the closest you ever got to an actual tornado?
Oh, half a mile or so. I have all that on video as well. But yeah, half a mile.
What was the experience like when you first saw a tornado? And how old were you?
Wow. The first tornado I saw was in Ellettsville, Indiana, west of Bloomington, in November of 1992. And we were chasing west of Bloomington and saw the tornado go through Ellettsville, destroy a mobile home, and take the roof off of a house. And that was maybe 3 years after I'd moved to the Midwest. That was my first tornado, and since that time I've probably seen about 10. But again, I go out to the Great Plains for 3 weeks in the spring looking for them out there, so our odds are better out there of finding them than they are here.
Let's see. There's one more question here I had. What makes a good storm chaser?
A good storm chaser is one who takes a lot of time to continually educate themselves about storms. That's the primary thing. One that has enough experience to stay calm in all situations, not to get too excited while they drive. Be careful, watch out for hydroplaning, understand the threats of lightning, be cognizant of the deteriorating driving skills of other people in strong storms, but to always be learning more and more and more about the storms. I think that's what makes a good storm chaser. Our learning curve is exponential as far as storms go, and there's so much stuff that comes out every month, and you really have to work to keep updated. And I think the best storm chasers are those that do keep updated.
And at the same time, we've seen these movies and other TV shows always portray storm chasers a little bit on the edge.
Okay, right.
Are they?
Some of them are, yeah, certainly. And I think one of the accuracies of the movie Twister was the characterization of some of the personalities. Yeah, you have the whole gamut out there, and there are some real characters. But there's a camaraderie, even though we, in a sense, sometimes compete against one another to try to get the best video. It's kind of a fraternity in a way. Everybody gets together several times a year at conferences and goes out and has a good time and shares stories, and we're all fairly close, but when it comes time to chasing, we kind of go our own ways, and we share some information, but we're probably out trying to get the better video. So in a sense, there's a competition there.
And what don't we know about tornadoes?
Oh, we don't know a lot about tornadoes. We don't know why they form sometimes and why they don't in other cases. We have some better ideas than we used to have. We cannot determine which storm will produce one and which one won't. That's our biggest problem. And Doppler radar, we were told in the 80s, will give us 15 minutes lead time for every tornado because it detects a large-scale circulation in the storm that will produce the smaller-scale tornado. Well, since they've had that in the field in operation, we found that only about 35% of the time that the Doppler detects that circulation is really a tornado. So there's a lot of times where tornado warnings are issued based on radar when in fact the tornado never develops. We don't know why it didn't develop in that case. Other times it forms when it doesn't look like it will. So we're really, in terms of our knowledge of tornadoes, we're at our infancy stage, I'd say.
What would it take to go to the next level?
Oh, it would take a lot more money. It would take a lot more money. We had Project Vortex that was run by the National Severe Storms Lab in Norman, Oklahoma, and they had an armada of cars, and each of them was fully instrumented. And they went out in the field and completely surrounded the storm, strategic locations. All of them had the GPS systems and all the meteorological data. was data logged. There was a P-3 Orion aircraft with a belly radar on it. They had everything, and they ran that for 2 years, and we learned an incredible amount in that 2-year project. If we could keep that going every year, I think that we would do a much better job with tornado warnings, say, within the next decade. The problem is the money just isn't there. So we get a project like this, and then you're going to wait 10 or 20 years, then maybe you get another one. So
does that upset you as a storm chaser and as an educator that the public's not concerned enough, especially after major outbreak after major outbreak?
I used to be upset about it, but I guess I'm getting old enough now where I realize that I can't change the world, so I just accept it. It's very true that people do not perceive the threat at the level that they should. I've seen many cases where I've been chasing and I've gone through a town and there's been people standing outside and I say, look, there's a tornado about 2 miles over there, it's going to come through here. And they just look at me like I'm nuts. Sirens go off and they continue doing their everyday business, don't look too afraid of them. And of course, when one strikes an area and somebody gets injured and barely survives, the story that they will tell is, boy, I'll always take them seriously from now on. And why people don't initially, I don't really know.
Are we prepared in Indiana and other Midwestern states for tornadoes?
I would say, by and large, yes, but I don't know that we're as prepared as we could be. I think it goes region by region or county by county almost. Some counties have very good emergency management agencies. For example, Delaware County has their new emergency management agency's emergency operations center that they're developing now. It's outstanding. So Delaware County is going to be in tremendous shape, but there's other counties that maybe don't have that type of infrastructure and are not probably all that well prepared to handle it.
Give me 3 good myths about tornadoes.
The first myth is that you should run around opening all your windows. Okay, that was based on the old concept that there's a tremendous pressure differential between the extreme low pressure inside the vortex of the tornado and the ambient atmospheric pressure inside the house. The idea was that the air in the house would explode out into the tornado, and if you were to equalize the pressure difference by opening the windows, that wouldn't happen. Well, that doesn't really work. The tornado is going to pretty much open the windows if it wants to open the windows. The last thing you should be doing is walking over or running over to a window to try to open it and then have some debris come through that window and you get pierced with the glass. Most injuries and deaths from tornadoes are from people being pierced by flying missiles. And even things like sticks at 300 miles an hour can go through a human body pretty quickly. So you just need to stay away from areas where you'd be exposed to missiles, and run into the windows the worst thing you can do. If the houses aren't airtight anyway, the pressure is going to equalize probably just as well without the windows open as with the windows open. So it really does little good. Another one had to do with the color of the sky. A lot of people think when you see a green sky or turquoise sky, you're going to get a tornado. Well, that color has to do with the sunlight refracting off of the hailstones. And storms that produce tornadoes, a lot of times they do produce large hail as well. So they see the turquoise skies, get the hail, and sometimes the tornado. So they make the connection between the tornado and the green skies. The real connection is between the green skies and the hail. It doesn't necessarily mean there would be a tornado. Another one is that tornadoes follow rivers. Tornadoes don't follow rivers at all. Some of the research that I've been working on, I'm starting to get a feel for the idea that maybe floodplains, not the river itself, but the floodplain, may help to provide additional energy to keep the storm in the floodplain region, and it may look like it's following the river, but that's not what it's doing. There's also some myths that large rivers will protect locations, that the White River for some reason is going to protect Muncie. Or out in Kansas, they felt Topeka was protected by the river. And then in early 1950s, an F5 tornado came through there and just tore the place completely apart. So that myth disappeared pretty quickly. And maybe the last one is that tornadoes don't occur in big cities because the ground is so rough it would break up the flow of the tornado. Well, with a strong tornado, it doesn't make any difference. And we've had some very serious tornadoes in big cities. We've had them downtown Nashville, we had it in Birmingham, we had it in Houston. So big cities still get hit pretty good with tornadoes.
Even Miami, Florida.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, downtown. That was actually the first day of a chase we did to the Great Plains. We flipped on the news that night to see what had happened, and over in Florida they had one. Yeah.
Tell me about TV meteorology and the program the minor we're developing for weathercasters.
Okay. Developing a minor through the Department of Geography for telecommunications students interested in potentially careers in weathercasting. Nowadays, obviously, they're looking for someone that they can market And as a marketing tool, they use a broadcasting seal of approval, such as that distributed by the National Weather Association or the American Meteorological Society. The idea of the minor here is to provide enough coursework for them to pass the exams that they need to complete to obtain their National Weather Association broadcaster seal of approval. Before I came here, we offered a couple of weather classes, a few telecommunications students who thought maybe they want to do some of this in the future, take 1 or 2 classes, but that would not prepare them for the exam they need to pass to obtain their seal of approval, and that's what this program is designed specifically to do.
What are they going to learn? What are they going to learn in that minor?
They're going to learn the basic theory of meteorology, basically how the weather works. They're going to learn about the technology of meteorology. They're going to learn about satellites, how to interpret satellite imagery, radar, how to interpret radar imagery, and the forecasting, the numerical forecasting models that we use every day in meteorology. To learn all about the different models, how to use them, the limitations, that type of thing. We also have a entire semester's course on severe thunderstorms and tornadoes, because a lot of times a weathercaster's primary role is when a severe weather occurs, and they need to understand all the terminology, all the technology related to severe local storms. So we spent a whole semester working on that. And of course we have a course in broadcast meteorology to give them a feel for the industry, the evolution of weathercasters over time, future trends, philosophies, those types of things.
And this is done in conjunction with telecommunications part?
Well, in conjunction in the sense that we are stealing their students, more or less, to run them through some courses in our department. But again, what they get out of it is a good background in weather and the seal of approval and the ability to take their career maybe specifically in a weathercasting, or at least have the opportunity to branch in that direction even temporarily should they choose to do it.
What do you think about TV meteorologists?
I think they've improved tremendously over the last 20 years or so. I think most of them have some coursework in meteorology nowadays. I think they do a very good job of communicating. Some are better than others, but I think there's been a tremendous improvement, and I think it'll continue for a while as well.
How far do you think it will go? Will we someday see experts doing it as opposed
There
to...
already are some experts out there doing it. I know several people who have been lifelong forecasters for the National Weather Service who have retired from the Weather Service and taken positions in the television industry. Some of them fail, some of them succeed. There's numerous people. Neil Frank, who is the head of the National Hurricane Center, is a successful broadcast meteorologist. So we have a lot of truly professional meteorologists have had great careers that have gone into TV as well. And I think, in terms of competition, that's brought the level of talent up, simply because they wanted to be able to, and maybe they couldn't top a station with a Neil Frank, but at least an audience is used to somebody that's very professional and understands meteorology. So if we're going to even have any chance at competing, we need to have somebody similar.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, we're moving from the stage of personalities to...
Well, it depends on the market, obviously. If you're in New York City or San Francisco or Los Angeles, where the weather is not particularly exciting, maybe New York at times, but certainly LA, Seattle, San Francisco, they want to hire more personality than meteorologists because there's not a lot of weather going on. So they need to be entertaining during that weather segment. If you're talking about, Oklahoma City or Topeka, Kansas, or somewhere like that that's in the middle of Tornado Alley, and they market their weathercasters on their meteorological background and their understanding of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. So I think it's region specific.
Do you see any of your students someday going in TV meteorology and taking what they learned here?
Oh, certainly. I've had the previous 5 years at Mississippi State, I probably had maybe 40 or 50 of my students go through my program there and are out in the industry right now. So I expect to continue that up here. And that was the idea of me coming up here.
Tim?
Yeah, I heard predictions for the season. They said this was going to be a very active tornado season. Can you do such a thing? Can you predict the whole season in advance?
I wouldn't be careful to step on any toes because I know where that report came from. Let's just say that it is very difficult to be specific about the character of a tornado season. There's simple correlations between these La Nina and El Nino years and the frequency of tornadoes. There's some generalizations that can be made in terms of probabilities. You could say, well, in this type of a La Nina pattern, it's more likely than not that the average number of tornadoes will be greater than the long-term mean. Now, what does that mean really? Who knows? Who knows? Does that mean that southern Indiana is going to get hammered and we see nothing in northern Indiana? Does it mean that there'll be greater than average number of tornadoes across the whole state? Does it mean that we'll see more strong and violent tornadoes than weak tornadoes? I really don't think that you can forecast such a small scale in both space and time. I don't think you can forecast it based on some large sea surface temperature anomaly way out in the Pacific. So some generalizations can be made, but boy, to call that a prediction, I'd be real careful.
You mentioned the community service aspect, and that we were kind of on the fringe of radar. How important are storm spotters and storm chasers?
Storm spotters, they are very, very critical, and I always use an example, and I wonder if I've got that thing with me. There was a tornado in West Lafayette right after the National Weather Service in Indianapolis had their Doppler radar, and the storm didn't meet the criteria in the software of the radar, the algorithms. It didn't meet the criteria to set off the alarm to issue a tornado warning, and no tornado warning was issued, and it went through and killed some people and injured a lot. And West Lafayette, at least as the crow flies, is not that far from the Indy radar, and it should have picked it up. And if we had had spotters out there, we could have saved lives. I think there's a lot of cases where spotters have saved lives simply because radar can't see a tornado. It can see the larger scale circulation that a tornado might be embedded in. It cannot see that tornado. And again, if the storm is some distance away from the radar is going to be shooting the mid and upper part of the storm because the Earth is curved. Okay, so you've got, you're shooting your beam out from Indy and it's going out level. Well, the Earth is, as you're heading towards Muncie, is curving up this way. So you're shooting the mid part of the storm. And what you want to be able to do is see if the low levels are rotating. And you really can't do that from the Indy radar this far away, not very reliably. So you need people out there on these storms so you can say, yeah, we start to see a wall cloud. It's rotating quickly. It looks like condensation funnels coming down. That's the kind of stuff they can't see on radar. And so I think they've saved a lot of lives.
And there's certain words you can listen to, let's say particularly to broadcast, forecast, that might trigger off the public should pay attention. For example, the potential for severe storms exist.
Yeah,
Are there certain words, catchphrases?
Yeah, there are. Well, yeah, the Weather Service in their forecast uses several. One of them is strong storms are possible. Now, strong storms possible means that they expect strong thunderstorms, more than likely not too many severe, maybe a couple that produce or events approaching severe limits. And the Weather Service defines a severe thunderstorm as exhibiting wind gusts of 58 miles per hour or greater, or hail 3/4 of an inch in diameter, or a tornado. So if the storms are kind of pushing that threshold, they'll say strong storms are possible. And then when they say severe storms are possible, that means that you're probably more than likely going to see some truly severe thunderstorms. There's also one other catchphrase you'll see every once in a while when they issue their severe weather outlook in the morning, sometimes the day before the event might occur. You look for the wording, particularly dangerous situation. Okay, that's the key. They call it PDS. And that tells you that if you do get severe weather, that you're likely to see some very strong and perhaps really violent tornadoes. So those are the terms I always look for when I'm listening. I look for the word strong storms are possible. Severe, they usually say some severe storms possible. And then in the thunderstorm outlook, look for that particularly dangerous situation statement. Because a lot of people hear that and it just goes, it goes in one ear and out the other. They don't understand what that means.
Well, it's almost nonchalant when they say it too.
It is nonchalant when they say it, and I think people miss it for that reason. But that's a code for meteorologists. That is something very, very significant when you hear those three words.
Are they trying not to scare people?
Yeah, they're trying not to scare people, and they're trying not to overwarn. We got that cry wolf problem where, if only 35% of the mesocyclones produce tornadoes, then we're going to have a false alarm rate of about 65%, and what's that going to do to the public's confidence? See, they're not going to pay attention anymore. So it's really a tricky thing. But the funny thing is, you always talk to people that have gone through a tornado, and every one of them will tell you, I'd rather be overwarned than underwarned. But the people that haven't been through a tornado don't even want to see the crawl across the bottom of the screen because it's taken off, Michael Jordan's sneakers in the game they're watching. So it's kind of interesting. Ultimately, it comes down to a person taking responsibility for their own safety. I think a lot of people rely on the federal government to protect them, and only so much can be done. Some people have to take that responsibility. And classic case, tornado comes through, somebody gets hurt, and they say a warning was not issued. We never heard a warning. There was no warning. Probably a warning out for 15 or 20 minutes. They didn't get the information, but is that the fault of the National Weather Service? No, they transmitted the warning according to procedure. This person may have been asleep, didn't have the radio on, didn't have the TV on. That's why they didn't get the warning. So people have to take their responsibility for their own safety.
All right, I'll ask you. What would give you the uh-oh thought in your head when you heard something? What would be the scenario that pop out in your head? Go, uh-oh, we're in for, or uh-oh, it's coming.
A lot of times behind a tornadic thunderstorm, there's a very strong downdraft of wind that comes from, say, 30, 40,000 feet up, smacks the ground, pushes out ahead. They call it the rear flank downdraft. Sometimes as you're watching the tornado, you've got your car pointed in a direction that is broadside to that, what we call RFD. And there's been a few times when we've been watching the tornado and you can see the dust coming right at you, knowing that the RFD, and then you got your car broadside instead of parallel to the winds. And there's been a few times when I said, uh-oh. I've been cut with like rocks and stuff from those rear flank downdrafts because I usually chase in the planes in shorts. So I get smacked in the legs and I've been cut. And we've had, the car shook pretty good. It didn't roll over, but a few times I was a little concerned it might. Other than that, I'm not sure there's been a lot of uh-ohs. I pretty much felt comfortable in each of the storms that I've chased.
Yeah, you haven't seen the flying cows? Or...
No flying cows. No. I do actually, a friend of mine, though, has a video of a tornado that pulled the cow up, and you could see it go up, but you couldn't see it fly through the air, I think. I don't know what happened to it. But it was sitting out on the side of the dirt road grazing, and the tornado just went across, and you could see the cow become obscured in the tornado, and then the tornado moved across the road, and he panned back over where the cow was, and the cow wasn't there anymore. So, but I haven't seen a flying cow. No.
I remember what I was going to ask. There's been a push recently. I've seen a lot of advertisement for the weather alert radios.
Right.
And they're saying, that Al Gore is pushing it as well. He's
Right.
mentioned some stuff
Right.
as well. I mean, do you think that's important?
Oh, it's absolutely critical, and I wish Al all the success in the world getting that off the ground. I'm sure he's fighting an uphill battle. A lot of it's political, but I mean, just for example, if you look at Delaware County, you turn on a weather radio, a VHF weather radio, okay? You cannot hear that signal. We are not covered well here, and that's the little alarm that's supposed to go off to warn us of severe weather. We can't hear what's going on. We need a repeater somewhere in this area. There are a lot of places in this country that are even maybe worse than what we've got here. So we need to really increase the number of repeaters in this country because that's how a lot of people get their severe weather information. And I mean, they have weather radios in all the schools. They know when to evacuate schools based on the alarm. If you can't hear the alarm, you can't evacuate. So we need to do a much better job with that. And I don't think it costs that much money to put up some more repeaters. They're not that expensive.
Yeah, we disconnected our cable last year. The thing I missed the most was that local weather service.
Right.
And then the Weather Channel. I missed that more.
There's a new package coming out. I can't remember the manufacturer. The Emergency Management Agency Director, Bill Gosnell, here in town, showed me one of these the other night. It's a box, and there's a radio signal sent out from the Emergency Operations Center in Delaware County, and it'll turn the little box off, and he'll relay live information. So it's like a weather radio, but there's not the problem of having a poor signal. And I think those are running $50, $60 or so. I'm not even sure they're in the stores yet. I think they're coming out very, very soon. So that'll be a feature I think that'll be nice to have. But then again, how many people will justify in their mind spending $60 or $70 to have one of those sitting on their dresser?
That's a lot of beer money.
That is a lot of beer money.
That's a lot of pizza money.
I had a crew here from ABC from LA one year, and it was a Friday morning, and we're standing around. 11 o'clock comes around, siren test goes.
Yeah.
And they go, "What's that?"
Yeah.
They were from California. And they were so impressed. They said, "Wow, you get a warning. At least you could have a warning for tornadoes. We don't." And their main concern, of course, are earthquakes. So
Right.
we don't get a warning like that for earthquakes.
No.
So there are some things that work, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm a native Californian too, and I lived out there for 20 some years, so I know what they're saying. And people tell me I'm crazy for moving out into tornado country. I know where the tornadoes are. I know when they're forming. I know where they're going to be. When the earthquake happens, who knows when that's going to happen? And when it does, huge sections of the urban area go down. It's not, you know, a city block. It's a whole damn city, and you got no water, no food, no nothing, you know. So I much prefer this to earthquake country.
I've had friends in California who say, I can't believe you live with all that snow there.
Yeah.
I'd rather dig myself out of snow than dig myself out of concrete.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Last question. You
Okay.
always hear people say, oh, it sounded like a freight train.
Right, right.
What did it sound like before freight trains?
I don't know. To be honest with you, in the 10 or so tornadoes I've seen, I've never heard one sound like a freight train. I know, in fact, that they do because I've talked to people that I know that have, in fact, been close enough, and they do sound like freight trains. I just never heard them. I think that it's a much smaller proportion of them than one would expect it would sound like a freight train. To me, it sounds like wind. Just rushing wind is what it sounds like. But again, you know, I haven't had an F4, F5 tornado bearing down on my house. Maybe if it were doing that, it might sound like a freight train. But usually, it just sounds like a tremendous wind.
Okay. We were joking about that walking over. What happened? What did it sound like before?
Yeah, I don't know.
I know. The one tornado down in Ellettsville. I lived in New Whiteland, and got off of work. I think it was a Sunday or something. It's the weekend. I got off of work. Channel. Because you're right. You want to get pictures of it. The video is the video.
That's
of all the times I've carried around a camera, you know.
Yeah.
And then the '74 tornado was my birthday, and Indiana.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody, please walk. Don't run. Be calm. Go to the basement. There's a tornado warning. And so we're getting ready. We go out, open the door of the classroom. Oh God, here comes the custodian running down the hall. Tornado! These are on the web too. We will probably link to your website. One of the things we've been doing with our with the news center is a feature, an area we call